Hello and welcome to Inside View. I'm your host, Joel Metzger, and joining me on today's show is Jack Garamendi. He is your District 2 Supervisor for Calaveras County and the Board Chair this year. Jack, welcome.
Thank you very much, Joel. Pleasure to be here.
It's always good to have you on the show, especially as Board Chair in a leadership position. A lot is resting on your shoulders this year. Before we get into some of your priorities and some of the challenges facing the county, I just want to make sure people know who you are as a person in case they haven't gotten to know you when you've been out on the campaign trail or in front of the board audience, which is always interesting. So tell me a little bit about your family roots in the county and how you ended up as supervisor over the years.
That'd be my pleasure. Joe, I'm a fifth-generation Calaveras resident. My family came here in the 1860s as gold miners, not for the bonanza that happened in '49, but more for the hard rock, deep mines. And so we came here, we started raising goats and then moved to cattle, and we've been cattlemen ever since. So my family's based in McCallum Hill. I'm graduated at the University of California. I have a master's degree from Cal State Hayward in business, and I spent 20 years working for the University of California. So it's opened up, I was a founding vice chancellor down at UC Merced, and 2009, my children were growing up, and we said, well, it's time to move back home and raise our kids in Calaveras County. So came back, try to contribute the skills that we have to our community, and decided I'd throw my hat in the ring for county supervisor and see how I could help out District 2. And it's been a great run. I love them. I have 8 little communities, all of roughly 500 people or less. They'll have very unique personalities and great people. And it's a lot of fun to represent my district. Good people.
And you live, is it down in the Paloma area?
I do. I live in Paloma. District 2 represents Paloma, McCallum Hill, Glencoe, West Point, Wilseyville, Railroad Flat, Mountain Ranch, and Calaveritas.
So when I hear that list of communities, I think Butte Fire.
Yes. Because
your district was hit harder than any other district. Was it all in your district, or did it sleep over into some other?
It was all in our district. There was a little bit of a leak over towards District 1 as it came around San Andreas, but almost entirely within our district. And we lost over 700 homes. And I think it's important for people who don't go up the hill from Highway 49 to realize this is a community that is still struggling to recover. So many people moved out. So much of our economy was lost. It's a daily struggle that these communities are facing as we recover. And it's 3.5 years later. And while most of the county or people have moved on in their thinking, it's still a daily presence with us. And we're trying very hard to rebuild these communities, have people move back in, support our schools and our local businesses. But the people of District 2 are resilient and they're tough. So we'll get through it, but it's a long haul.
You know, I have so many personal friends who live in District 2 and had their homes destroyed, and many of them struggled to want to move back into that area because it's just so different. The landscape is so different, and the trees that they loved aren't there anymore. So how do you and your constituents deal with those kind of conversations?
They're a daily occurrence. I mean, we have people that were retired and living up there, and they lost everything. And the environment that they built their home and raised their family in is radically changed. Mm-hmm. And it's hard for them to go back. And so some of them move on. Maybe their grandkids are in San Diego, and they don't want to restart. It's very much a challenge to get people to move back in there because the landscape has changed so much. But it's really important. We've just got over 100 homes rebuilt. That's not enough. We have a housing shortage. It impacts everything. It impacts our local businesses. It impacts our volunteer organizations like the fire department. It impacts our businesses. And so it's a priority to get people moved back in, and it impacts our schools. We need young families moving up and putting their kids in our schools, and because their schools are really very much the heart of any community. And we take great pride in our schools up there.
And from your perspective as a supervisor, Certainly, the whole board was involved in the effort when the fire happened, and then the recovery effort. But in terms of steps to prevent this, or at least minimize the damage for the future, because obviously this brush is going to grow back, and we're going to have a fire hazard again. What's your thinking on that? From a planning perspective, in order to be proactive about preventing another butte fire.
Well, first I'd like to say that the current board and the former board, were very supportive of our butte fire recovery. In many cases, the county has to front money for recovery efforts, removing trees, fixing roads, and they get reimbursed. And our board was very supportive of that, and it's worked out fine as far as cash flow. Dealing with the future fire, and we know there's going to be future fires, is something that the whole county needs to take on. It's a county-wide issue. And we're going to have a study session probably in March of this year. We're going to talk about emergency preparedness. We're going to talk about fire breaks. There are volunteer organizations such as CalAm, led by Colonel Pat McGreevy, that are working very hard to draw things I'm working with CAL FIRE to draw things like the maps of where our fire breaks are, applying to grants for CAL FIRE to expand our fire breaks and protect our communities. And that work is difficult. Mm-hmm. It's very expensive, but I will give the kudos where they deserve, and that's many of our volunteers in our community are stepping up and being force multipliers to their county and their fire departments and building these fire breaks and helping apply for grants. CAL FIRE has been a very good partner for us in that effort. And our local fire departments are working on preparedness as well. Signage, maps up in Central Fire, so that if there's another fire and a fire engine comes in from Stockton, we could give them a map and tell them where the homes are. Yeah. These are things that didn't exist before the Butte fire. So we're trying to learn from our lessons there and make sure that we're better prepared. But wildfire is just going to be a constant. Our climate is changing, our environment is changing. Those trees, those spaces that are burned are growing back. In District 2, that's a threat. But there's also a great threat on the Stanislaus Canyon.
That could be devastating if the Stanislaus goes up. And parts of it have, but nothing like the Butte fire.
No, and we anticipated in the Butte fire, most fire experts thought it would burn straight up the canyon instead of turning south through Mountain Ranch. So they're unpredictable. Mm-hmm. But, just because we don't know exactly how it's going to burn, we know what will burn. And it's incumbent upon the county, the state, the feds and our national forests, and our local homeowners to make sure that we're adequately prepared for the next fire. Because it's not a question of if, it's simply a question of when.
Is it challenging to have a lot of the Butte fire burn area be private land and BLM as opposed to a U.S. Forest Service or something of that nature? Or is it hard to get in there and actually do the recovery work that you need to?
It is very difficult. It's always easier if there's a single landowner, right? And so if it happened like Tuolumne County's fire, primarily in national forest lands, so there's a single landowner. District 2 and where the fire was is a patchwork, private property and BLM primarily. BLM is a horribly underfunded organization. Yeah. They control a great deal of our landmass, and they simply don't have the funds or people to manage it adequately. We have been working with them to try to find ways to clear some of the hazard trees on their land from falling on county roads. It's not a question of will from the local employees, it's a question of capacity. Mm-hmm. And until the Department of Interior decides to put money into helping BLM clean up their property, we're going to be at loggerheads. And this week we took on the issue of some of the Butte fire trees on BLM land that were going to fall on our roads. We've been working with the federal government for over 2 years to try to get money for them to do that work. Mm-hmm. But we're unable to secure that due to a series of laws. And so the county's actually going to do that because otherwise somebody is going to get killed. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to take that on, and we hopefully will recover that money from BLM in the future.
So this is a larger issue. Wildfire is one thing, but emergency response in general is the overarching issue. And
Absolutely.
We not only have wildfire, but we also have flooding, and we have snow, and we have heat waves and drought and all kinds of things. I know that the county hired a new director of OES.
Yes.
Is that Michelle Patterson?
Yes.
Tell me about her and what she's doing.
She's doing a great job. She's preparing us for the next disaster, making sure that we're coordinated. We learned a lot from the Butte fire. We learned how to coordinate our volunteers, which is very important. We learned how to centralize services within the county. We also were able to identify places where people need refuge. If we learned one thing from the Paradise fire, or Camp Fire, in Paradise is that people need escape routes. So that's a real question. A lot of the subdivisions that were put in over the last century were a single road in, a single road out. That's a death trap. And we saw over 80 people die up in Butte County. We don't want that to happen in the next fire. So we have to prepare for that. And that's going to be a combination of working with our local fire department, our sheriff for evacuation, but also a question of county planning. We need to solve problems that already exist, but we also need to make sure that we build correctly in the future so that a fire can respond to house fires as well as out-of-control forest fires.
And I know the county's done a lot of planning through the local hazard mitigation plan to address all these things. So it sounds like there's more proactive and less reactive. Do you feel good about the direction in terms of future disasters?
I do. I feel like we're working hard to clean up what happened in the Butte fire and fix that, and that is work that is going to be continuing. But also, everybody's aware of the risk. I mean, I think many of us, yourself, myself, who enjoy the outdoors, who grew up here, have always looked at the forest as a friend. Unfortunately, after the Butte fire, many of us see it as a fearful place. So how are we going to make sure that it becomes a safe place? And that's just going to take, unwinding 100 plus years of fire suppression doesn't happen overnight. We're only going to eat this elephant one bite at a time, but it's important that we prioritize how we do that. And where the best pieces of that elephant to be most effective are.
So you as board chair, clearly Butte fire recovery is a huge priority.
Yes,
what else is on your list looking forward?
We have a lot of issues that this board's going to take on, and I compliment our board. This is a working board. We're going to get things done this year. And we had at the beginning of the year, we sat down, we talked about what are our priorities? What do we need to get done? And without any dissension, the number one priority we need to get done this year is our general plan. We need to get it done. It's been sitting out there far too long. We need to get this behind us, but we also need to, and as we were talking before, we're going to get this done in this year. That is my goal. I'm a grinder. We're going to try to get this thing done, and
I've heard it before.
I know.
I really have.
We're going to do it. Okay. But we're also going to try to, I hope that we'll be able to do some things as a board that will keep this from having this build up every 20 years or 10 years for a general plan amendment. And that's really come up with working teams at a standing committee with our planning department and our planning commissioners, where we annually take a look at our general plan elements and say, you know what, let's take a look at our housing. Is there something in our housing elements, is there something that we need to take on there now? Or something we missed that we need to update? So it's a continual process of improvement rather than this big event coming up to this head, but it's something that we're working on always, because businesses, environment, people, situations change. State law changes. We have a lot of state laws that are coming out right now that the county's concerned about, that we need to take into account for areas like ours, which are high fire danger. It costs the state a lot of money, so they're putting a lot of effort into trying to figure out what is the best way for us to plan. So there's going to be constant changes in state laws, and since the county is going to have to take on the effort to update on a regular basis, we should. And we should make sure it's not just fixing this one thing for the state, but taking a look at the element and saying, what needs to be changed here? Is this still valid, or have things changed in the last year or two?
How does not having an updated general plan impact our county?
We want people to be able to be safe and successful in our county. People, businesses need assurances of what is going to happen. They need to know what the rules are. Most businesses, they may not like the rules, but if you know what the rules are, you can work with them and find a path forward. So I think it's giving people assurance. It's also a statement on what we want to be as a county. We know what we are. What do we want to be in the future? Perhaps we're fine the way we are. Perhaps we want to change. But that's what the general plan does. The general plan is not the panacea to all the county's problems. We don't finish the general plan and suddenly everything's done and we go away. It's a work in progress, and it's a continual effort to improve, and that's the way we have to approach it.
So what you're doing is you're removing uncertainty and giving people more confidence to maybe take some risks in the county because they know what the rules are and they've been updated.
Absolutely, and we need to make sure that in our general plan, we preserve the things that make Calaveras special. I mean, when you talk to people, the thing they love is our beautiful landscape, our rural character, our old towns and their nature of it. I know Vallecito and Moke Hill, we've both got a lot of old buildings.
Yes.
And those are important, and those are what people, tourists, and our locals want to see. So we have to find a way to preserve those. You know, I often drive down the road and look at the old barns, and I think, oh, those are just spectacular. Let's find ways to incentivize landowners to keep those barns standing, keep our landscape open. You know, people often say, you know, how's this so beautiful? And it's a combination. It's a combination of centuries of work. First by the Native Americans in building this beautiful landscape, ranchers, landowners, merchants. We've all made a beautiful community, and that's what I want to preserve.
So general plan, goal, get it done by the end of the year. What else is on your list?
We're going to need to hire a new CAO. And that's going to be something we're going to take on in the next couple months. That is the Chief Administrative Officer for the county, the person who reports to the board and manages the day-to-day operation. That's a very important role for us to fill. We'll be taking that on. We're going to have to deal with the budget this year. You know, we were running a deficit. We've been very good about saving money, cutting costs. It'll be interesting in June. We'll have our mid-year update in February, but the real numbers are going to come in June. What do we have? And we have to live within our means. We're not going to deficit spend. We're going to live within our means, and we'll have to explain to people if we don't have the money and we have to reduce services, why and what that means. And that's going to be a question of priorities the board needs to take. We can't do everything for everybody, but we can do the important stuff. And that's really important. We're going to take on, we have to take on issues like campus infrastructure at your county buildings. These are buildings that are owned by the entire county. And they really haven't been updated since 1960. So our power, things that just keep a modern business running, we have not made an investment in. Roofs, that costs money, and that's not always popular with the community to say we're going to spend county money on fixing our infrastructure. But it's the infrastructure that the county all owns. So we're making an investment that should have been an ongoing investment. But, you know, deferred maintenance tends to build up. We're going to take on, as I mentioned, disaster preparedness, legislative advocacy, dealing with Sacramento, making sure that the rules that come out of Sacramento are appropriate for our county as best we can, working with our state organizations. Items like insurance. We're all suffering from lack of insurance up here, or it's becoming so expensive that people cannot afford it. And so we want to make sure that rural California and places like ours have access to insurance. This issue existed in the 1980s, an issue called greenlining, where insurance companies were not selling to inner city urban areas because of poverty and risk. Well, we're poor and we have great risk too, and we're being redlined out of insurance markets. So we need to take that on at a state level. We already mentioned Butte Fire. Housing, you know, it's associated with the general plan, but we need to find affordable housing for people. I'm not talking about just low-income housing. I'm talking about housing for working people that they can afford to live in and be part of our community. When people are having to commute long distances, we need jobs. We need jobs and housing so that people could stay here. I'm not talking about paving over our county. I'm talking about letting people who live here have jobs and raise their family and participate in their community.
And on that point, I mean, I'm an example of someone who was able to find a job in this county, but many of my friends weren't able to find jobs in this county that could support a family. So that's a very real issue. What role do you see the Board of Supervisors having in economic development? Because I know passports have kind of felt like, well, that's not really our responsibility. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think economic development, the board has a great role to play. One of the things is to give businesses confidence that there's consistency here in the county, and we know what's going on, that we're open for business. We don't get to bend the rules, and there are certain rules on zoning and certain rules that companies need to go through, but we can have an attitude of welcome here, and we need to do that. We need to, it's not just retaining people, but it's bringing in talented people who could start businesses as well. And I think the county has a role in that. When we talk about accessory dwellings to homes, in-law units, the county is working, to make that easier. There are appropriate places for housing, and we need to make sure that we promote and help people get that done.
Do you have any direct staff who are focusing on the economic development at all, or?
We do. We have an economic developer who's been on board, Kathleen Galino.
Okay.
And she's been on board for about a year, and helping these businesses go through our process.
Another thing I hear from certain contractors or developers is maybe I'll see an eye roll when it comes to how long does it take to get plans through or an inspection, things of that nature. Do those kind of things come to your ears, and is there any way to remedy that, or is it just a cost of doing business and it's hard to...
I think it's something that can be remedied and must be remedied. My phone number on the county website is my cell phone. So I hear a lot. People don't have a problem picking up the phone, and I appreciate it. It gives me good insights. But we do need to work with building, and we're staffing that up. We had some challenges in getting enough staff and the right staff in place, but we really do want to become customer-oriented. And there's no excuse for someone having to wait an extraordinary amount of time to have their plans checked. Mm-hmm. We have to go through the rules and make sure that everything's to the code, but we can do that in a much quicker manner, and that's something I know it's a priority for the board, because obviously we hear it a lot. Mm-hmm. It's not just my cell phone on the website. All of my other board supervisors have the same issue, so we all hear it, and we want to fix that.
But then we come back to budget, which you touched on briefly. Mm-hmm. It sounds like there's been some deficits the board has faced in past years. So how do you bring those two things together, where you maybe have fewer dollars but you need more staffing? How do you handle that?
Well, issues like the building department and planning department, they're paid for by the fees that people pay at the front desk. Okay. So when you submit your plans, they're supposed to float on their own bottom on that. Sometimes the county has subsidized it. Other counties do. To the best of their ability, knowing that the quicker we move things through, the greater the economic growth for the community overall. And the easier it is for someone to build a stick home, the more people are working on that swinging hammers. Modular homes are great, but then it's not nearly as many jobs for our local community, or jobs in Woodland where they're manufactured.
Right. So it's kind of a balance. So some of these departments, the more business that comes through, then maybe the more staff they could staff up, but it's dependent on the business that they're doing.
Exactly. And sometimes counties need to seed departments to get them going.
Got it. Back to budget, because I want to make sure people understand this. What do you see as what has caused the budget deficits? And you mentioned that things may need to be trimmed or services may need to be reduced, but you would explain why. What do you think are the root causes of having a budget deficit?
We've been running a budget deficit for probably close to a decade. Coming out of the recession, or as we come out of the recession, but beginning in the recession, we had severe cuts in the county. We have a county policy on our budget that says we don't want to use one-time funds. So the county collects one-time funds on things like teeter funds, which is an assessment on late property taxes. It's in our best interest in the policy of the county to use those on one-time expenses. So if we need a new roof on a county building, that's a one-time expense. What we've had to do, and I think it was from necessity from the past boards, and I understand why, we've dipped into those funds to balance the budget for ongoing operations, which leads to other challenges. But we've had a long-term reduction in our revenues. We have a declining population. Our housing values were down, although now they're finally back up to where they were.
Oh, they are back.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And we're working to make sure we invest our money in the right places. Investing in the sheriff's office. People need security as well as economic opportunity. So we've made those investments, and those are ongoing expenses. We don't have a Calavera Cement anymore in our community. So it's a series of small businesses, and those are harder and a greater risk to our community. So we have to prioritize the economy. We're just coming out of it. But I think that through priority budgeting and figuring out what we need to spend money on and what our priorities are, we could hopefully balance our budget.
So what you're saying is the budget has been getting an infusion from the teeter fund, which is one-time fund, in order to balance for a number of years. The idea is to try to wean yourself off of using those one-time funds.
The last two budgets we had cannabis dollars from the Measure C tax that came in, and we were using that money to balance our budget. Those dollars are no longer available to us, and so there's going to be a reduction of revenue, and subsequently a reduction in available funds for the county. As I said before, we did some cutting last year in anticipation of that lost revenue, and we're doing some reprioritization. So I'm hoping that when we get to June, we're within $1 million or $2 million of floating.
So you mentioned cannabis. We have 5 minutes left. Let's talk a little bit about cannabis. There's a lot of history to cannabis, but basically the county has, in a way, kind of gone and flip-flopped on it a number of times in terms of, is it not okay? Is it okay? Do we have some legalization or some regulation? And then, no, that's okay at all. So now that we have a new board, you're in charge, and we have some other new board members, what is most likely going to be under discussion in this next year regarding cannabis?
Well, we talked a little bit before about business needs surety in order to invest. Clearly, this county has not presented that forward look for people, so people have a lot of questions. What this board is going to do in February is we're going to have a study session on cannabis. We're going to talk about with our department heads what worked under the urgency ordinance, how we got there, what didn't work, and ask them what suggestions they had. Then the board will have a conversation and decide, is this an issue that we want to take up again? Is this something we want to explore? Do we want to start creating a new ordinance? Based upon that decision, we have a lot of choices to make. Zoning, location, all the parts that go into a cannabis regulation. We will discuss and we'll make some decisions. Then, assuming that the board wants to move forward, we will take a look at a draft ordinance later on this spring or early summer. But I think it's really important to understand that we need to, if we're going to take a look at this, we need to, and we decide to move forward, we need to do this in a very organized manner. In 2016, we had an urgency ordinance because we were riding the horse and we lost control of the reins. And the best we could do is hold on to the horn of the saddle and not fall off. Now, I would argue at the end of the ride, we were able to get control of the horse. But the board decided to dismount. Now we're talking about getting back on and taking this for another ride. But I will guarantee you, much like the general plan, we are not going to lose the reins of this time. If we're going to do this, we're going to do this correctly. We're going to do this in accordance with state law. We're going to do this in accordance with zoning regulations that make sense. It makes no sense to have a cannabis farm in a residential community. We need to make sure that we take into consideration neighbors and communities, and we need to do this correctly. I do believe that it can be part of our economy. I do not believe that this is the panacea to all the economic hardships. I would hope that if we can do this correct, it's just another industry in Calaveras County. But I just want to be really firm that, we're not opening up the gates. We are not going to have another green rush. And if we do have another green rush, then we're not going to have this conversation. We're going to do this by the numbers in an orderly manner. That's if we do this, if we do move forward, that's how I'm personally going to insist that we do it.
So we'll see what come out of those discussions and how the board feels about it, but there may be some movement before the end of the year, it sounds like, maybe even in the spring, summer.
There may be some movement. I would not, if I was a potential grower or had a license, I would not anticipate anything happening in 2019. Now that may change, but we have to stand up a whole new program. And we're going to do it correctly. We are not going to do this as an urgency panic. This will be deliberate.
Got it.
If we do it.
So if people want to get a hold of you or learn more or ask you questions, how do they go about doing that?
You could reach me on the county website. You'll see my email address. The phone number on there is my cell phone. I apologize. Sometimes my voicemail gets filled, especially on days like this where it's snowing and power's out. But please feel free to give me a call anytime in the community, and I'm happy to talk about any of the issues that are going on.
Supervisor, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much,
I appreciate
Joel.
it.
Appreciate it.
And thank you for joining me on this edition of Inside View. I'm your host, Joel Metzger, and I hope you join me next time.